these hungry Steam Deck fans again. Hello, people. Another beautiful day. Yup. Hope your five senses work. Health and strength is good or excellent. What? All right, Steam Deck fans. You know the Steam Deck tribe, nation, universe, world, legion. What's good? Mob, what's happening? Squad, what's up? And you nerds, geeks, and freaks, and you investigators, what's happening? All right, what I got for you guys? Listen to this. What's up, Phoronix? Says here, it says here, it looks 20. It says it looks like 2024 could be the year of HDR on Linux desktop. But they got a picture of the Steam Deck here. But anyway, it says here, written by Lorabelle, it says KDE developer Xavier Hugi has shared a status update on the current state of HDR support for KDE Plasma. While Valve has HDR working nicely on the Steam Deck OLED with their GameScope compositor, when it comes to conventional Linux desktop with HDR, there's a lot of activity happening, but much of it is still pending. Though, with how things are pacing with experimental AMD color management and the Linux 6.8 and various desktop pieces slowly but surely coming together, it looks like 2024 could be finally the year that HDR on Linux desktop will work nicely. Says here, Xavier Hugs shares an end of the year update around the state of high dynamic range support for KDE desktop. And then it says some of the main takeaway from the update includes KWin now support ICC profiles at the moment. Apps are still limited to sRGB use. System 76 implement a Vulkan layer that allow application to be used. VK _ext swap chain color space and Vulkan VK extension HDR metadata protocol. Says here Plasma 6 will enable HDR in the display settings. In terms of Plasma 6 as HDR enabled, there is then SDR brightness and SDR color intensity settings. KWin has to implement a small WLAN protocol similar to how the Steam Deck OLED with GameScope is handling HDR. There is being done until the proper WLAN HDR protocol is completely upstream. Plasma 6 plus GameScope is yielding work in HDR for games like God of War, Cyberpunk 2077, Quake 2 RTX, and others. Xavier ended his latest update with, obviously there is still a lot to do. Color management is limited to sRGB or full blown REC 2020. You shouldn't have to install stuff from GitHub yourself, and certainly shouldn't have to mess around with the command line to play games and watch videos in HDR. HDR screenshots and HDR screenshot recordings aren't things yet, and many other small and big things need implementing or fixing. There's a lot of work needed to make these things just work, as they should outside of special case like GameScope. Things are moving fast though. I'm pretty happy with the progress we've made. And then it says see his blog post. But then there's what's this? The lights. There's 23 comments. Listen to this. See if I can get actually 28 comments. Yeah. And the Linux community speaking their minds here. We want HDR. Yeah. Anyway, let's see what he says. Someone says, look like we're carving to say year of something like Linux desktop. Someone else says, I remember them saying 2023 was going to have HDR. Good to see it's finally happening. And then someone, okay, who was that? The first two people that I read, let's see here. That was, let's see, who was that? That was, okay, that's Phoronix. And then, Mir, and Viper 29. And then someone says, Rainfire said this: 2024 is the year of Linux desktop. For sure this time. LOL. It is for me anyway. For free on the side. I did like to add that the my Debian stable please greatly with no snack packs or flat packs or corporate pro version added to it for dollar support. Now to unsub the thread, slow down the hate mail. And then Reba said this: I know this might be unpopular opinion, but I actually dislike HDR. When using HDR, I have the brightness of the monitor much brighter, which uses more energy, creates more backlight bleeding, carries the danger of blinding me unexpectedly when some application or web page or whatever considered itself to be, I have to be bright, or is not HDR compatible and thus misrepresented its brightness. I sincerely see no need for HDR, none. Why? In the photograph, okay, 10 plus bits / color channel, okay, but HDR monitors? Question mark. And then UXM said this: what good the year of HDR on Linux desktop if we haven't even had the year of Linux desktop yet? Oh God. Man, these dudes are hilarious. Anyway, see, when it comes to HDR, some people like it, some people don't. Anyway, let me keep going here. Since you're laughing and giggling, I don't need the lights. I'm good now. Anyway, all right, let me keep going here. Man, I love reading these comments from Phoronix. Show you how people feel. All right, where we at? Keep going here. Okay. And somebody, okay, who is this? Get this pop-up out of the way here. Someone says, okay. Somebody responded, says, Dimco said this: no one forces you to use HDR 24/7. I want it only in video content and in games. The rest of the time, SDR is fine for me. Or HDR, maybe too. Someone else said here, Bugs said this: which would be a problem for me? Okay, because of my monitor is wide gamut. Apparently Plasma 6 has fixed that by not allowing me to set an ICC profile at all, or at least they buried that where I can't find it anymore. And then someone else says here, okay, 10-bit color is obviously good, but I've yet to be convinced on the need for variable brightness in content. Maybe it would look better on OLED, although my phone is OLED, and I am not really convinced there either. I certainly wouldn't want an OLED computer monitor because the risk of static content on the screen for extended periods of time is extremely high. And someone says here, several times I have looked at the content on HDR screens and thought, wow, this looks great, only to realize that HDR was not actually enabled. When it does come to Linux, I hope there is a way to verify that what you're looking at is in fact HDR. Love these comments, man. The Phoronix community ain't no joke. Someone else here says, okay, for far being unpopular, this is what most people think about HDR, but this isn't based on the merit of HDR. HDR is awesome, parentheses, but then he says, but on the crappy monitor people used to experience HDR. For HDR, you need OLED or some other tech that feature per pixel lighting. Many of the other monitors that tout HDR capabilities only have up to 384 zones of local dimming. That's way too coarse. It will cause lighting to bleed and kill the image quality. As for the brightness, you can read the specs for that. Peak brightness is meant only for a few percent of the screen surface and is only sustained over a few seconds. Screen-wide max brightness is much lower than that. And yes, for adding realism when staring directly into a light source, that should result in your pupils closing. Facts. It says, if you want proper assessment of HDR, forget about PC and try demos from YouTube or some Netflix title. It can look truly awesome. Alright. Yeah. So when it comes to HDR, people are like this. It's like 50% HDR. Yeah. But anyway, someone else here says, this should, okay, keep going here. Someone likes the comment from KWin now support ICC profile and display settings. You can set on each screen with KWin. You can use that to adjust the color gamut, which will be a problem for me because of my monitor is wide gamut. Apparently Plasma 6 has fixed that, not allowing me to set. Okay, all right. Someone says, yeah, okay, all right. +1 for this. My 45-inch LG OLED is amazing when gaming in HDR, enough so that I don't mind having to control Alt F2 out of the launch Steam in the GameScope section. And someone, Boss, who was that? That was Ultra. That was Ultra that said that. Now Boss said this: real actual HDR is a big difference and game changer in movies and other media. You don't need an OLED either, as high-end LED can actually get higher than OLED. That said, most HDR monitors are trash. Essentially, don't really have HDR. The lowest specs was HDR 400, and to really do HDR, you need at least 800 bits of brightness. The monitor HDR certification is essentially just a marketing badge. Then Murray said this: quality HDR compares to SDR is like taking a gray film off your screen. All the colors of a sudden look more real. I have a GameScope plus Steam session set up on my desktop, and it's very nice looking. Anyway, all right. Someone else here said, what did he say? He said, oh, you don't dislike HDR, you dislike bad HDR. Let's break down the issue. Here we go. He says, okay, I have a brightness of the monitor much brighter, which uses more energy. This actually shouldn't be the case when it's needed. HDR doesn't need you to crank up your monitor brightness. This is behavior that can be disabled on most HDR apps and Android. B, HDR isn't about everything brighter. HDR is about increasing the contrast in luminance between parts of the image. 90% of HDR content should be within SDR range. HDR is for emphasis. Okay, here's another bullet point. Carry the danger of blinding me unexpectedly when some application or web page. This is a normalizational problem. This used to be an issue on Apple before they rolled out a patch, but the compositor can see, hey, this content want to pump out 10,000 nits of brightness, but everything else is only putting out 400 nits. This seems like a bad idea. Let's do 600 instead. Then tone map the image down appropriately. And then here's another bullet point. HDR brings a lot of benefits to a table outside of HDR mastered content. 1, PQ transfer, then it says in parentheses, the HDR part of HDR is a spec with an absolute luminance. This means content graded for PQ is all equal and will render correctly on any display that properly handles no more shenanigans with sRGBs, where some images are graded for 80 nits, for 120 nits, some for 203 nits. HLG is still a mess though. And then he says 2 PQ, better fit modern display than sRGB does, which was intended and developed for CRT display. PQ managed to fit more data where humans actually differentiate light difference, while still being able to represent brighter colors fine. This means we can have even less banding and better black grading. And then he says 3. Aside from tone mapping, PQ much more consistent and reliable to handle. Unlike sRGB, where it's 50-50, if apps or display actually adhere to sRGB specs or use Gamma 2.2, which kills black levels. Yeah, these Linux Linux gamers ain't no joke. Okay, here's another person's argument. He said yes. Okay, who was this? That was who was that? That was Quack. Then Chevy said this. He said yes and no on HDR 400. I just upgraded to an HDR 400 monitor, a BenQ MobiQ X3415R, and its picture and colors are so much better than the HD than whatever HDR that was on the 4K Android TV. I used the game on that, and I got in 2020 on a Black November sale, like my monitor this year. For me, probably a lot of us, the problem with going high quality HDR is the cost. For what I want, IPS or OLED, 500 plus nits, 1440p or higher, 21.9 curve VRR, and 34 plus, basically something worth to have and not be cheap. I usually settle for like an on sale TV. It didn't help. It didn't help that weren't that many panels that met those requirements without spending over $1,000. So I settled for a 400 nit max monitor for $606 on sale, and I'm really happy with it. While I can tell you that it could be better, since it seems like my range could be a bit better when calibrating the black and white levels in most games, it's still better visually, and when calibrating the generic HDR screen I came from. Lowering my seemingly high monitor requirements to 24 plus and 16.9, there's still nearly $600 plus to get anything with more than 400 nits. 2024 is going to be a great year for Linux HDR. I have been loving the primarily support that KDE is starting to offer. Then someone says here, Quack says this: HDR 600 is for sure better than HDR 400, and HDR 800 better than that for sure. But HDR 400 is still a good improvement over SDR. Then Berger said this: do you have an OLED monitor? If not, you haven't seen what real HDR looks like. If you do, then I am not sure. TBH, every game monitor I have ever bought, I made sure HDR was off because of how bad it looked. I start using OLED with the LG C1 and C2, now LG 45-inch, 240 hertz, ultra wide, and can't go back. I have never once been blinded by web pages. If you are, and then it says in parentheses, and it's OLED, your monitor came horribly calibrated, or you calibrate the monitor wrong. Then Quack said this again. He said, I wouldn't say it's horribly calibrated. This was actually a genuine issue with Apple, for instance, which has the best HDR handling of any ecosystem. Apple users. Anyway, turn the light here. Whoops. Alright. Someone else here says, your monitor really matters on how good the HDR is. A lot of monitors are advertised as HDR compatible, but use the crappy edge lit method, which introduced backlight bleeding problem you mentioned. The really good HDR screen use a lot of dimming zones. Yeah, man, these Linux gamers, they know they stuff, man. That's for sure. These these comments are no joke. Anyway, here's another comment. And this is the last page, by the way. It's 21 minutes? Oh, that's nothing. Alright, keep going. Listen to this. And this what Weasel said this. He said this. Amen. HDR is the biggest pile of steam, can't say that word, to have ever existed. It should be banned. It should be a banned word. What? Anyway, he says your eyes adjust to different light intensity and brightness, so HDR does absolutely nothing here except temporarily blinds you in either direction. Note that HDR doesn't mean higher color depth / resolution, because I bet peasants will start whining about color banding and other artifacts due to low color depth / resolution. 16-bit per each color channel is not HDR. We don't need HDR. It is just a stupid fad. He said, more color depth equal very good, and I have full support for it. HDR equals garbage that should be expelled from existence. Oh my God. Wow. Yeah, these these Linux gamers ain't no joke. They're no joke. Alright, here's the next comment. This is Burger. Burger said this. Apple's XDR display has pretty bad response time and ghosting issues. Overall, Apple HDR is pretty bad with blooming issues, etc. There are a bunch of online comparisons showing the first LG OLED against Apple XDR display using HDR on both, with LG blowing Apple monitors out of the water. LG. Anyway, let me stop. Anyway, and then let's see here. Who was that? That was Burger. But then Burger came back and responded again to he was responding to Weasel's comment. He said first he responded to Quack's comment, but then he comes back and responds to Weasel's comment. He said, I agree with some part of this. If a monitor / TV is not OLED, it shouldn't be allowed to be called an HDR monitor / TV by any means. There's probably another tech out there that can produce real HDR also, but I have only used VA, IPS, TN, and OLED. And then Bug77 responds to Quack's comment about HDR 600. He said this. Another common misconception. Display HDR 400 is just a backdoor so vendors can slap HDR on every POS monitor. Display HDR 400 requires nothing beyond the ability to display SDR, with the exceptions of local dimming. But since it doesn't require any level of dimming, you should have a crappy 2-zone implementation of local dimming, and you would still qualify for display HDR 400. Then he says in parentheses, I know of no such monitor, but there have been implementation using 8 to 12 zones, specs straight from the source. Anyway, And then Neo said this. Thank you, Lord Gaben N. Thank you, Valve. Thank you, Holy. Oh my God! Sitting here laughing. He said thank you, Lord Gabe Newell. He called him Lord Gaben. Thank you, Valve. Thank you, Holy Lady Dr. Lisa Sue. Thank you, KDE Dev. And at last but not least, Nvidia got the worst. I'm not even gonna show you. Oh my God. Anyway, and then Bug77 said he responded to he said they say that, but IRL display under setting JPG. And then Danny 3 said this. He said are you sure you select the right monitor? Maybe the 4K one has HDR support. And some questions, are you sure the connector on the monitors have the right versions? I have a 4K Dell monitor that said it support HDR, but they tricked me as DisplayPort connectors has a very old version that didn't support it. And when I tested the HDMI one with a laptop with Windows 10, it looks like crap. That I had to turn it off. All right. And Kurt said this. He's responding to Weasel. He said this. Turn this light off. He said this. The whole point of HDR is that the really bright part of the image come off as really bright. This done by some special signal that tells the monitor to concentrate backlight energy on a certain dimming zone. For direct LED or group of pixels for OLED, note all modern TVs are POLED, AK, and LCD panel with per pixel backlight are implemented by a organic LED behind each LCD pixel. So yes, POLED TVs are indeed backlit, and AMOLED implementation would have to drive the RGB subpixel harder instead. Then he says, anyway, the above does make really bright parts of the image. Then he says in parentheses, such as the sun or bright reflection of the sun, look really bright because the part of the panel does reduce substantially higher brightness in that region of the screen that it could produce in a sustained manner across the whole screen. This is why HDR monitor, and then it says in parentheses, proper HDR monitors have two different nit ratings, peak and sustained. By disabling HDR, you are losing peak brightness. And then in parentheses, he says, equating it to sustained. Then he says, also do not HDR use on browser text editor spreadsheet etc. This thing meant for video and games. Maybe that's the problem here. OS vendors just can't grasp that simple fact and enable HDR only when needed. Look. Then Bug said this. He's responding to Danny. I was saying they talk HDR, but in the meantime, even the basic ability to set ICC profile is gone. Then Slay said this, responding to Bug. This looked like you're on X11. At least the global scale factor seems to reveal it. Anyway, my super insider knowledge that comes from reading the Super Inside Matrix channel for K-Win devs say that KCM for it might not have been ported to QT6 for the beta. I can't verify that myself though. Alright, anything else? Man, these guys was going at it. Oh, one more comment. And Bug came back and responded to Slay and said, thanks for the hint. Yes, X11, but the setting used to be before. I've been meaning to give Wayland another chance, but didn't have the time so far. All right. Well, RGB, HDR, OLED. The saga continues, man. So, yeah, those were those Linux gamers, Linux users giving their thoughts and opinion and input, insight, wisdom, and issues and problems that they came up with when using an OLED monitor versus HDR. And yeah, I learned a lot. I learned a lot from those comments, man. But yeah, the saga continues. The saga continues, man. So yeah. You know, some people like HDR. Some people don't. Some people like OLED. Some people don't. So it's a 50-50 when you look at the whole situation. So yeah. 2024, the year of HDR for Linux. Well, we shall see. You know, we shall see. We know the Steam Deck has HDR built in already. So yeah. You can use the Steam Deck as a desktop, you know, so that's why it has desktop mode. So yeah, but HDR, it depends, you know. But then all those comments brought out one important point. It all comes down to what the human eye can handle, you know, and how much bright lights the human eye can handle, you know. That's why most people, I think that's why most people, some people go blind too, by how much light, how much brightness of light hits the human eye. So yeah, you gotta put that into consideration, you know. I mean, me, I don't even have the Steam Deck OLED yet. I have the this is the 64 gig model, and I'm happy with what I'm getting from it. I mean, do I need the OLED? I'll probably get it, but not right now. I will probably get it. Probably sometime later, sometime when I get the chance to get around to it. But it all comes down to, man, what the human eye can handle, man. That's when you're talking HDR and OLED and SDR. It all comes down to these two. What the human eye can handle, man. Because you don't want to go too overboard. Because if you do, you might end up what's that word I'm looking for? Blind. Okay. So the key word now is if you're content with a display that you're using, and it's not affecting your eyes, man, then you're good. Okay, so like somebody said, I forgot who said HDR need to be banned. So yeah, yeah. It all comes down to the user, man, you know, and what your eyes can handle, man. So be careful with this HDR, OLED, and SDR stuff. Anyway, I'm gonna leave this video for y'all to enjoy. Nice talking to you people again. Chris, still a Star Wars and Star Trek fan for Dark Side. Go on. Peace.